Hello, welcome to another version of C.A.B.B Notes, October 10th, 2014. This is a show on the First Amendment, which I think is a very important issue in today's current affairs. So I think we're going to start the show off by having an actual reading of what the First Amendment is. So one of our panelists, Michael, is going to read it, and then we'll introduce the panel and start talking about it.
Okay, thank you. First Amendment, written in 1791. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Okay. Maybe I'll let the panel introduce themselves.
I'm Rosemary Jakowski. I live right here in Bennington.
My name is Michael, and I live here in Bennington.
I'm Andy Shirkey. I live in Shasberry. I'm working with a national organization called Veterans for Peace with the Vermont chapter.
Okay. So the question is, why are we having a show on the First Amendment right now? Why do we feel like this is important? And I'm going to quickly lay it over to our panel, and who I think have a lot to say about this, and we'll get a general view of why we're having a show on this issue as of right now. So we'll start off with Rosemary.
Thank you. I have a very short quote here. I don't think that the person who originally said this had the First Amendment in mind, but in my view, it is one of the strongest arguments in support of the First Amendment. I think many people will recognize and be able to identify the person who said this. This is what he said. He said, "Reports that say something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know." That statement was made at a Department of Defense briefing on February the 12th of '02 by Donald H. Rumsfeld. And I think that it supports the First Amendment because I think that one of the most important aspects of the First Amendment is chipping away at the unknown unknowns.
Okay, thank you. And do you have a general statement, Michael? You'd like to just what your...
Yeah, one of the things that I've embraced over the last few months, I've been reading a lot of things about the First Amendment and how it's affecting, or how it's been affecting education. And the reason I say this is because there are a lot of instances that we don't know about where educational systems are being forced to, or being pressured to hold back certain types of literature based on their content. And one of the things that comes to mind is an article that was written by Frank Bruni of the New York Times recently, and he talked about how education is something that is supposed to be disruptive. It's supposed to make us feel uncomfortable because we're learning and we're being illuminated. Referring back to, let's say, Plato's Prisoners of the Cave, where they stared at the shadows on the wall from the beginning of their life, and all they knew were the shadows and the reflection. And in reality, behind them were people who were just moving puppets and causing them to just, interpret their knowledge was coming from what they saw on the wall only. And then years later, one of the prisoners was taken up the steps out into the real world, and everything that he had thought based on the shadows on the wall, he found to be untrue. And this illumination disturbed him and really made him feel uncomfortable. And when he went back to try to share that with the prisoners who remained, they saw him as being someone who was foolish and out of his mind. The reason why I say all of that is because education is one of the most important aspects of this society. It is something that represents, in some instances in history, it's represented power. And to put out, to tell people that they cannot read or learn about something because it might hurt them is preposterous. It doesn't make sense that in this country where we have so many different avenues to find out information, especially now with social media and all the technology available, and I refer to specifically young people, obviously, in, whether it's grade school or even in college. The fact that we have situations where school boards or even parents to some extent have a problem with certain texts that might be exposed in classrooms, to me really touches on aspects of the First Amendment.
Not to cut you off a second, but that's actually a very hot subject right now. I don't know if it's Texas or Utah, but they're trying very hard. They want to call it. They want to promote good history. They want to promote positive history.
Right.
Colorado.
Colorado.
The students are actually on strike in Colorado because they want Zinn and Chomsky included, and I really think that
Right, that's a situation where they are
right.
asking for certain material to be put in the school board, or the powers that be don't want that for whatever their reasons are.
Right. So obviously it's a very relevant subject.
I think it's important to understand that the First Amendment, part of one of the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution, commonly referred to as the Bill of Rights, was part of a great political compromise that was made in order to pass the Constitution of the United States. Threaded throughout each of the first 10 amendments is language which basically says not so much what the people can do, but basically guaranteeing what the government cannot do. I think it's an important distinction, because the reason for the compromise was that many of the delegates to the Continental Congress at that time were very much leery, even afraid of a strong central government. Having recently been victimized by a strong central government called the British Empire, they knew very well from first-hand experience what excesses a strong central government could have upon the people that they were governing. So part of that arrangement was this compromise that as soon as the Constitution was passed in 1787, that there would also be a follow-on Bill of Rights. The first 12 amendments were part of that compromise, and the first 10 being the Bill of Rights, which guarantee the rights of every individual citizen of the United States of America.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we should read the First Amendment one more time, or have somebody, or then if you want to go into something very specific you would like to start talking about on why you feel so.
Well, I think that Andy and Michael both brought up extremely important points that we, we need to talk about. And maybe you folks who lived in Vermont for a while will remember back roughly 9 years ago, it was at the time of shock and awe. This was in the newspapers, and I apologize because I don't remember the name of the town. It was a little town in Vermont, the central part of Vermont. Apparently the students in the high school were discussing the pros and cons of whether or not we should be bombing the people in Iraq. And the police chief in that town, in the evening, after everyone left the school, would go into the school and inspect the bulletin boards to see the things that the teacher and students had put up. And anyway, eventually people found out about this. It was written about in the paper, and I forget how it ended. I think for some time they considered firing the teacher and so forth. But I think that's a perfect example of the chilling of conversation in schools, and it's going on all over.
Right, I mean, maybe we should focus for a while on the whole education aspect and move on to that concept. Because, what Michael was saying, and, you know, I'm not even a sharp observer of the scene, but I know that there are certain states now that are actually trying to, how can we say, strip down the text of any, what they would consider negative thoughts, bad news, this concept that, you know, history should be looked upon in terms of truth or in terms of interpretation of the truth as best you can. The idea of sort of making a truth into a ideology or into a what a small group of people think is the truth.
Well, I think that gets to the basic question: what is the purpose of education? Is it to produce good, patriotic citizens who believe that their country is perfect and has never done anything wrong? This is the way things have been in this country. I graduated in 1954, and that's what we were taught way back then. I know some of my classmates quit school so they could enlist because they wanted to go to Korea to kill people there. So this is not a new problem. But maybe the purpose of education is not to just boost patriotism, but to make citizens who are more capable of critical thinking.
I think, John, what you just mentioned is a perfect example of why there is this thing called the Bill of Rights. Because if that school board, it represents a strong, very powerful, central controlling body. People, students, teachers, parents who disagree with that kind of policy, by the First Amendment, have the right to speak out against it, and they also have the right to get together in peaceable assembly to oppose it. That's a classic example of what the Bill of Rights allows every citizen to do.
Yeah, that's interesting because the act, there's the thinking, there's the opposing of something, and then there's the act. And as much as I agree with you about they have a right to do that, I question who determines what someone can learn. And if you're denying me the opportunity to learn based on your views, and I'm just using you as in general,
Right, of course.
then are my First Amendment rights being violated in that way? You know, it's almost like where does the pendulum
Right.
stop?
Mm-hmm.
Right, I mean, we have to realize there's flaws. We have to realize that it's an imperfect concept and it's fluid and that it's malleable. And I guess the real key though is just not what he's saying. If there's a central body that's fairly small, that's dictating this is exactly what we have to do, and leaves out the fluidity of other possibilities, period, then, you know, that's sort of the,
Well, I think the classic quote, at least regarding the freedom of speech, was expressed by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes when he said, "Everybody has a right to speak out.
right.
It does not mean they have the right to stand up in a crowded theater and yell fire."
Right, no, we had a small situation, I think, in Bennington Friday night. There's a plot of land across from Little Britain, and I think it's town property, I'm not sure. And, I don't know if it was rented, or they got a permit, but a Christian church. Friday night was supposed to be open stores, first Fridays, you know, to promote businesses. And this group ended up proselytizing their religion on a very loud speaker that took over the whole downtown. First Amendment rights there, what is that? It's a small issue, but I felt like being bombarded by something that I had no control over.
Mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
I was quite offended by it.
Would you have felt bombarded if it was not so loud? Supposing the group was just there, assembled, and saying, you know, this is our belief system and this is our religion, would you object to that?
I wouldn't have been, no, I probably wouldn't have objected to it, and also it had minions out on the streets passing out cards, I mean,
This was a group that was doing this, John?
yes,
All
I'm not sure, it could have been the Summit Church, it's one of those Christian churches that are now
That,
pretty strong.
that comes under, I suggest, more of the First Amendment right of peaceable assembly.
Right.
And the courts have held that, yes, every group is guaranteed the right to peaceable assembly, but they cannot do that assembly anytime, any place, anywhere, in any manner. They have ruled that location, time, and manner of that peaceable assembly can be regulated by law. So in the case of that group that was doing their thing there in downtown Bennington, would probably fall under that constraint of peaceable assembly.
Right.
The location, all right, if that's a place that's normally accessible as a public space for people to gather, all right. If the time was okay, was at a time where normally whatever they were doing would be acceptable. For example, if they were doing that in the middle of the night and possibly becoming burdensome to neighbors living in that area, that would not be allowed. The manner in which they were making their statement might also be regulated. So those three criteria have typically been used by the courts to determine what is acceptable public assembly. Basically, those three criteria do not address the content of what the public assembly might be about.
Okay,
That it's a location,
Andy,
time, and manner.
that's a really important point, because we have no free speech zones on Main Street here in Bennington that address only the content, not volume or the time of day. It's only the content. You cannot say, please give me money, but you can say, please give me directions to the monument. I think that therefore the anti-panhandler law as it exists now in Bennington is a violation of the First Amendment.
In some instances, the federal government has been known to, in instances where they believe that a speaker or event might be subject to lots of people opposing it, they have, under these regulations, for example, designated, forgive me for hand waving, free speech zones. In other words, you can do your thing, but you can only do it within this very, very limited geographic area that we are going to define by fences, barriers, police, anything else. So they are saying that, yeah, you can still have exercise your First Amendment right, but you can only do it within our free speech zone.
Yeah.
One of the classic examples I would point out was the second inauguration of President Bush, in which they designated a free speech zone, which was quite a distance away from where the inauguration was going to take place. And they said, hey, we're clean, you can do your thing, but you're 7 blocks away from where this event was going to take place.
So, it's on the Occupy Wall Street movement, when they were allowed to stay at that park in New York.
City Park, yeah.
Right, now what happened there? Eventually that was no longer accepted as didn't the
Yeah.
rules change on that? For a while, they could peaceably
Yeah.
assemble there.
Yeah, they decided that after a certain time, I forget what day it was, or what hour it was, maybe it was midnight or something, they would have to leave, because in their judgment, that was a violation of time. It was a public park, yes, you could go
Right.
there, but you can't be there after a certain time.
And then there's civil disobedience issues, like, you know, the famous story, the World War I veterans that didn't get their benefits, and they camped out in front of the White House.
Well,
That I think were,
Coxey's army.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
well, that's civil disobedience, or that's First Amendment, I'm not
Well,
sure.
yeah, that, of course, that brings in to play the whole other issue. If people believe that they have a right under the First Amendment to speak out or to assemble peacefully,
For an injustice.
and in the name of speaking out against an injustice, what are the limits that the federal government has been known to
Well,
take?
I think it's important to know that, you know, with all freedom comes responsibility. And I think that, you know, when the fathers and authors of the Constitution and Bill of Rights obviously could not foresee the type of societies that we have
Sure.
today, what we live in today. And maybe they didn't even anticipate that there would be so many issues to demonstrate against, you know, I don't know.
Right.
But the point is that there's something here I just wanted to read real quick. It says, all forms of expression, nonverbal, artistic, written, and visual are protected by the Free Speech Clause. It's true of all the amendments. There are, as is true of all the amendments, there are exceptions. And this is where, you know, there has to be flexibility, where local or federal governments need to monitor situations in the best interest of safety. You know, fighting words obviously are not considered something, you know, covered by it. And so, you know, I think there's a fine line, and I in some ways, I respect that certain activities need to be monitored for the overall safety
Absolutely.
of the public. But at the same time, again, we're talking about, you know, we're talking about expressing views that could hurt people. I mean, you know, when we talk about the First Amendment, and when we talk about free speech, does that mean that I could just walk around and say any old thing I want to say? And you know, whether it's toward a group of people, you know, words of hatred, or you know, in today's society, it seems as if, you know, when you speak out against a group of people, and I just mean general hatred or, you know, dislike of that group, we seem to have made we make a big thing about it, but it's really, you know, unfortunately, ignorance is also covered under the First Amendment. And
You're right, you can't put someone in jail for being dumb. I mean,
exactly, you know, and that's my point. And
that's okay, I mean,
Stupidity is
but-
not covered.
but dumb and evil and malicious intent,
Right.
yeah, that's when we
Yeah.
start parsing out.
Yeah.
You know, okay, let's take an issue like global warming, and let's say on a bigger scale, a lot of the networks or purveyors of news services that tell us about situations might be funded by people who do not want to see too much definitive information on what's really happening with, you know, fossil fuels, or what the state of the economy, why things are, you know, if we're eating gluten-filled food and we're getting obese and all that, you know, we want to keep information like that tampered down.
But I think that's an important point, and I think that there's a distinction between privately owned media,
Right.
TV,
Right.
newspapers and so forth. They're really not bound by the First Amendment. Newspaper can print or not print anything it wants, but I think that it's different. Well, there's slander and there are other kind of cases, but that's not
This goes back to
truly.
his personal responsibility thing, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's no sense in not
Yeah.
bringing that up.
Yeah.
But I think that it's different when you're talking about schools, libraries, public facilities that receive public tax funds. For example, a while back, the publicly supported firehouse here in Bennington would not allow candidates to participate in forums if they weren't Democrats or Republicans. Some libraries that receive public funds ban some books. Some schools ban information, and I want to give a plug, sorry, to the Bennington Banner.
No, you can't, this is
Sorry.
Too late.
We're cutting you off.
Because, sorry, but yesterday, they actually published
Yeah.
this living in
The
Columbus myth.
Great article.
And that is so important. One of the things I've always said is that Columbus didn't discover America. Maybe the people who were here first discovered America. You know, so the things that we were taught in school are wrong. And schools receive public funds, and therefore schools should meet a higher
Well,
standard.
that's a good point. Okay, let's just take for granted, let's just make the bold statement that we were taught about Columbus, but in particular was wrong. Okay, that's okay, I'm not gonna hold anybody accountable, but now why can't we adjust? Why can't we try to right that situation?
Well, we should.
No, but that's what I'm saying, there should not be an issue of like, you know, people get uptight because we shouldn't denigrate Columbus. Well, you know, in a really healthy society, you should be able to evolve. In other words, we can theoretically see him a little different now. Doesn't say we have the truth, because once again, it's from our point of view, from our time, space, and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, why can't we start changing our points of view on Columbus? It doesn't have to be taught that way every single year. You know, yes, he did.
Well, let's take an example of let's say we have a teacher who's teaching 5th grade history, and he or she decides that, you know, after researching a little bit, finds that, you know, Columbus actually never really reached what we now know as America, that he only
You
reached...
can't say that.
Yeah, see, and he only really made it to the West Indies or whatever, you know, and we find all this information out, and he was really in it for the money, and, you know...
Well, he's
this
been
and that.
fine. He had to bring back money. It was
Well, yeah, there was, and then he went back again. I mean, you know, it wasn't until I became a young adult that I didn't realize that he only went, you know, he made about 3 or 4 different trips, you know. This guy was all over the place you know,
Yeah,
from,
right.
from 1492 to about 1505. He was going crazy. But the point is this. If a teacher decides to tell her students, you know, step outside the curriculum for a minute, and say, you know, kids, I know we tell you that Columbus discovered America in 1492, and there's a parade down Fifth Avenue, and, you know, for some reason, a lot of, you know, my Italian brothers seem to be the ones that have grabbed onto, you know, credit for Columbus, because he was originally from, you know, Italy and this and that. But I want to tell you, kids, that, you know, he really never made it to the shores of America. You know, he stopped in the West Indies, and he left his men there, and he actually went back and reported to the Queen, and while there, his men were, you know, doing, you know, bad things to the natives that were there, very peaceful people, naive people maybe in a way, because they were sharing things with them, thinking these people were here to help or whatever. So what if you know, we get into all of that, and of course, you know, kids going home, Mommy, I'm not going to the parade down Main Street because Columbus really didn't discover them. And the mother goes crazy and starts writing letters to the board and this and that. Next thing you know, this teacher is looked at as, you know, somebody who's out of their mind. You know, we're talking about the teachers, first of all, right to free speech in a way. But then we have to also look at the responsibility she has to her students who are still young. So, you know, I'll look at that and say, okay, well, you know, maybe we should, you know, monitor that a little bit. But if what she is saying is true, or he or she is saying is true,
as best as they can, as best as they can
Yeah.
present it. We gotta keep away from this whole thing. What's true and what's not.
right?
'Cause
Well,
I totally agree with what you're saying. But the point
yeah,
is,
well,
once again,
that's the problem with history.
no,
that's
I
over,
understand.
you know,
But we gotta keep it fluid like that, as opposed to saying, yeah, this is the best way we can present it at this point, and it's a growing,
yeah.
changing thing.
Right, that's true. You're
That's
right.
all I'm
You're right. You're right. And so, you know, if she, or let's say she just gives her opinion. Let's go there with it. You know, I feel based on what I've researched that, you know, he really didn't, you know, make it to. Is she wrong, or he is she wrong?
Well, why can't we present it as just saying, well, he's the beginning of a Western migration, one of the great migrations across the ocean of the European peoples, and you know, as opposed to discovering anything, because as we know, there's people here and all that kind of stuff. Well, why can't we just present it in a different way? Okay, now the European countries started this great migration over here for the sake of
Land.
profit, land, you know.
Freedom.
No, but you know what he's saying, you know, one of the things that, the easy thing that is, why is the defensiveness of not getting rid of Columbus Day, because we all feel like it's one of the cornerstones of our country, and you know, so to be uptight about it, you know, you say, oh my God, there goes one of our great myths, you know, but you can't be afraid of the truth. I mean, that's,
Yeah,
that's,
well, you
that's,
know,
you know, we had a civil war based on truth. I don't care, people can call it state rights, but it was based,
that's true, yeah.
you know, and if we can go through that.
Well,
I remember being very disturbed when I found out that it wasn't really Santa Claus. And, you know, but I made it. I made it through it, you know.
yeah.
But
yeah.
you know,
Right.
these things come out, and you know, this is why I think people like Zen and these other authors who, you know, write what they write. You know, there's something about keeping this information away from not just children or students in general, but just, you know, people. You know what? I'd like to assume that people have the ability to process information and filter it. You know, filter it on their own, and not necessarily run with it. We talk about, getting back to the education part, we talk about what we want our children to read and be exposed to in school. And yet, and parents are quick to attack teachers, school boards, whatever. And then, you know, the same family or the same parent has to deal or needs to learn how to deal with all of the things that this child can learn outside of the umbrella of school, and especially in today's techno-driven world. So now you give little Johnny a TV up in his room. He's got an iPad. He's got he's got all kinds of. He can look at the world through his, you know, in his room and find out things that you wouldn't even think to tell him yet.
Well, that's why I brought up the bigger aspect of, you know, whether, you say, you know, newspapers have the right to print whatever they want to print, but you're talking about somebody who's at the mercy of this technology. And now what's the bigger issue? Okay, what's the corrupting of that technology? I mean, that's whole.
Well, yeah, I think the explosion of the social interactions. I'm disturbed that so many young people do not have the availability or the interest or the access even of finding out what's going on in the world. There's been lots of studies that indicate that the news is not very high on their priorities.
There's that, and there's also a lot of subtle things. We had a interesting discussion Sunday, and this person was saying, you know, because we go back and forth, is technology good or bad, you know,
Sure.
and so on, and it's passive aggressive. You know, you may learn a lot, but you're doing it from a passive point of view. So does that mean? What does it all mean?
Yeah.
But he went embrace technology, and one of his precepts was, I'm walking down the street and I'm talking to my friend in Gaza who's being bombed right now, and I'm showing solidarity with that person, and you know it's very true.
Mm-hmm.
So, and used in that context,
Yes. Yes.
that you know it's just very direct.
Very.
There's no filtering. There's no no sidebars. You know,
Very,
just
very immediate.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole different take. That's
I think that kind of touches on the on an issue of if there is a group of persons, or a number of people who disagree with whatever a central authority might be saying, whether it's a curriculum choice or how the subject is being taught, what might their access to opposing that might be. Traditionally, and I mentioned earlier about how the Bill of Rights was basically a compromise, let's face it, a deal between a number of politicians in our first Continental Congress that made the Bill of Rights an actual reality, was based on an incident that happened in Boston in 1770, when a bunch of, I'll use the word patriot, okay? In 1770, they weren't really patriots. Some of them may have been disguised as painted aborigines who dumped English tea into the Boston harbor. But there was a group of people who gathered in Boston and were protesting against the English taxes. The English soldiers, the occupying army at that time, opened fire on those protesters and killed 5 of these.
So the first person was a black person. Was
One of the first persons was
died for this country.
a Negro named Crispus Attucks.
Right.
Right.
So there is always the issue of if a person or a group of people assemble peaceably to protest something, what will the authorities' reactions be? Even though they obey the parameters of being in a legal place at a legal time and their manner is peaceable, but yet the authorities take measures to not only break up the protest but to arrest protesters.
But also, I find, once again, everything is, those people that went down there, Christmas Addicts, some of those guys kind of rebel. Sam Adams that kind of put that together. He's a bit of a rebel rouser. I mean, he used to go to all the local bar rooms and get the local guys. So I mean, they were. I don't think they went down there like Gandhi.
Yeah.
I think, but still.
But I think a lot of behavior of the men that we're talking about too is relevant to, relevant to the times. I don't know how successful or how acceptable a Samuel Adams type.
Well, he wasn't.
person.
From what I understand, this is just my reading.
Yeah.
He wasn't a great speaker. I mean, he was a great mind, and he was a great force of getting people to understand
Right,
things.
right.
But he knew he needed somebody else to do the actual.
Right.
Speaking
But
for
I
him.
guess I'm just kind of agreeing with you, and I'm saying that, that's what was needed at the time. He was needed. I mean, or for that particular cause, let's just say.
He was a big guy.
When I look at history and I think about what was happening, the birth of the nation and all of the battles and controversies that went on, I'm very thankful for the people in history, whether, again, that's just assuming that, everything's true, okay?
We're all victims of our times.
Yeah,
We have to,
so, it's like now today, that same type of gun-ho and, ability to gather people might be looked at differently, even though the cause might be valid. But I do feel that again, going back to the, actual First Amendment and how it's affected by these things, it comes with, like I said earlier, the responsibility of people. I don't know. I don't think that I think that First Amendment rights are being violated on a daily basis in little, sections, little areas of the world, little areas of our community, all the time.
But
all the
people
time.
don't know about it because I get back to the unknown unknowns. For example, if important historical information is left out of a textbook, people don't know about it. It's not there. You don't know what you don't know. If a library bans books, how would you know? They don't
Not
post a list of books that they've banned.
Well,
So it's the unknown unknowns.
that's why it's critical that oppressive governments or controlling governments try their best to limit the information that people get and have access to.
Well, what's the controversy with the internet now? I mean,
Well, I'm talking historically.
No, right, but isn't that sort of what's happening with the internet, the free flow of information? Isn't that sort of being, some people get it faster now, and they're trying to divide it up into, there's a richer people for internet, there's a poor.
Well, that brings up a whole issue of the neutral internet, and I think at some point that will have to be decided by the courts. But I think you're right that there is some organizations, some providers who do not or will not carry controversial programs, make them available.
Right.
That's happening even as we speak.
But, so I agree with Michael, the question is, so I guess, I'm not saying we need the rep to show up, but do we feel like, why are we talking about this? Do we feel like, are we losing our sense of the First Amendment? Is it
Absolutely.
under attack?
I mean,
Can you give me just a general sense?
well, in Burlington, for example, they had, and I don't know what it was called, I think it was an anti-vagrancy ordinance, and I think that was challenged and might have been overturned recently. But here we have the panhandler bill, and no matter what, you think about poor people or panhandlers, that's really irrelevant. Everyone should have the right to say whatever they want, no matter how unpleasant, no matter how much you disagree with it, if it's in a public place. And if, for example, if you want to ban certain political or religious books, then you should set up a privately funded library that does that, and don't accept public money. If you want to have a political forum that will not permit certain people to participate, do it in a private place, do it in your home.
I think that makes sense. I mean, if you're taking, if my tax money is going towards this library, I don't understand why certain books would be banned from that library. Based on what? I mean, based on the fact that they're not comfortable with the subject or the topic.
I have here a letter from the American Library Association, and I'll just read one sentence. ALA does not take action against libraries or librarians that engage in conduct that may violate the professional values and ethics of librarianship. In other words, any library that's a member of the American Library Association can ban any book that they want and still maintain their membership and have the plaques on the wall and so forth. Nobody is watching. Nobody knows what books are being banned. People don't know what information is being omitted in textbooks. For example, I wonder how many textbooks include the fact that the United States was found guilty in the international court, I'm sure Andy knows more about this, for mining the harbors of Nicaragua.
1984.
I knew you'd know that. Now, how many people, how many citizens, how many teachers, how many students are taught that? We're only taught one side of history, the side that makes us look perfect.
That goes back to
No,
that goes back to
It goes back a very,
Hollywood
very
in the
long
50s,
time.
after World War
Yes.
II. You know,
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
to John
back-
Wayne and
yeah.
all, and all we got was our version of the war and all of that. I mean, that is something, and I'm not minimizing it by saying it the way I'm saying it, but it's what it is when it comes to our country. That's a form of patriotism, and it's something that we were comfortable with in a way, until we're not comfortable with it, until we realize that we're being fooled.
Well, that's the point I'm making. What she's saying, in 1984, the people who were involved in that, in a sense, or the people that are affected by that are still around. So they're going to make sure that they're still, we might have to wait 20 or 30 years. It's, oh yeah, by the way, we did that, and
Well, a bunch of them went to jail for it.
Yeah.
Right, but
Yeah.
a lot of them still
Yeah.
stayed in power for quite a
Yeah,
while. I mean,
yeah,
maybe the
yeah.
people in the basement went to jail, but
That's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was an interesting example of free speech right. Year and a half ago, I was involved with a group of people who were protesting the United States use of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, to target and kill people in countries we are not at war with. And some of them were being operated out of an Air Force base outside of Syracuse, New York. So a year and a half ago, a bunch of us decided we ought to protest that act. It was illegal. It breaks at least 4, maybe 5 international treaties that the United States is party to.
well, now you protest the drone. You're talking about the drones themselves.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And one of the protesters, a woman from Washington, she was arrested, and she was charged with obstructing government activity and blocking traffic and all that stuff. She did this protest outside the gate of the Air Force Base. Well, she came to trial last month, and
This was 5 years ago. The protest was 5 years
a
ago.
year and a half ago.
Oh, a year and a half ago.
Yeah. So she came to trial, and lo and behold, the judge dismissed the charge. what the evidence showed was that she was reading the preamble to the United Nations Charter, and she was reading the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. The police had arrested her, took these documents, and they threw them on the ground, and they clapped the handcuffs on her and let her away. The judge threw the case out.
Well, if he wanted to stay on the bench, I guess
So,
that's the
so,
only thing he had. That's the only choice he had.
so okay, well, that's a nice example of exercising your First Amendment right. I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Read it.
Yeah, yeah.
Very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, well, that's typically the case when people believe that they have a grievance, they have petitioned the government. Nothing's happened. The government didn't do anything to change it, but people begin to protest, whether they're protesting against violations of their civil rights, whether they're protesting against war in Vietnam, and they are peaceable, typically, although sprinkled among the crowd are invariably a bunch of anarchists who are intent on destroying property. But by and large, the people are exhibiting their First Amendment right of peaceable assembly and freedom of speech.
What could be done, even locally, to kind of enhance the spirit of the First Amendment? Could there be, for example, a committee in the schools that was devoted to freedom of information? Could citizens request that the libraries provide lists of books that they have banned? Things like that. You know, I don't know. I think we should move beyond just rhetoric and think about what can we do? What action is necessary? Who is it that we need to appeal to? Who has the power and the authority to make these changes? I don't know.
Well, the obvious answer is the school systems, I think. However way they want to do it or allow it to happen. There are teachers in our public schools who would very likely support that kind of discussion in whatever form, whether it's a panel discussion among the students, whether it's reading a specific on subjects by specific authors as another way. But
There's a little bit of fear. The
Well-
conversation often is chilled in certain areas.
Well, some teachers have been let go in other parts of the country.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean,
exactly,
so it's
exactly.
fine. But maybe just promoting the First Amendment from the day one in first grade as a great thing into itself. We can pick apart the evils and the good and bad of what the country itself has done, but that document, those lines, are profound. Maybe just that is the way to get started. It's just a curriculum thing every year. I mean, those so like you learn the Pledge of Allegiance, which when I understand under God, that came in the 50s, right?
1954.
Yeah, that's you
Yeah,
know,
because the godless communists, that's why it was put in.
Right.
You know.
Right, so that's another thing that we should be told. I mean, you know,
Well, yeah.
Sam Adams didn't say one nation under God.
Well, I got a report that in 1939, when I don't want to give my age away, but 1939,
Too late for that.
Right,
When I-
you were 1 year old, right?
when I was pledging allegiance to the United States, we did this. I pledge allegiance
Oh,
to the
really?
United
Oh, yeah.
States of
Yeah, I
America.
remember
Wow,
that.
I
You
do
put your
remember that
hand
image
out with
now.
your
I've seen
palm
that
up.
image.
That's how we did it.
And then the Bible was read in schools I attended,
No.
and then the Lord's Prayer was
Okay.
said,
Okay.
talking about a public high school.
Well,
Okay.
you know, like I said,
Whatever. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thing is, you know, why can't we then, you know, not that that's good or bad, but then, you know, why can't we openly discuss that? Because we have Islamic students, we have Jewish, you know, so why can't we discuss that? Maybe we don't want to have in the public schools talking
Well, I
about.
think they probably just figured it's easier to remove that kind of, remove those things because of the multi-ethnic, multicultural society.
Well, it's not easy to, no, you're right. It's
I mean,
easy
by
to-
the time you get, or say by the time you go through each cultural group, the class will be over.
No, right, but,
If you do that, so it's best to just say, okay, you know what, let's just not do it.
No, but
Or,
that,
you know,
but it shouldn't be such a big brouhaha. The point I'm making is
Oh.
the backlash.
I think it's fear.
yeah.
I think it's fundamental fear of the backlash that it might
Right.
be incurred from
Right. This,
parents, citizens, or whoever.
right. And so this goes once again back to the fear thing, responsibility. Yeah, there's a lot of nuances there.
Yeah, yeah. But I think talking about peaceful public assembly, it's a matter of historical record that leading up to the United States attack and invasion of Iraq, 200 students left Mount Anthony Union High School during class time, and they marched to the center of Bennington at four quarters and expressed their disapproval. I don't want to say outrage, but certainly it was their disapproval against the action that was going to be taken by the President of the United States.
I forget if that was 03 or 91 that happened. I remember it. I'm not sure of the year. Most people don't even realize that we've been bombing Iraq and that region since 1991.
Yeah.
But I remember there was great participation from
Indeed
the
there
high
was.
school students
Yep.
and the college students.
Oh,
It was
I would guess
it was wonderful.
91,
Yeah.
no, it wasn't, I'm guessing because.
Shock and awe was 03,
Right.
but
Yeah.
we started bombing
And
in
there was
91.
the school took some kind of corrective action, let's say, against the students.
Really?
They were denied some perks or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Really?
But yeah.
well, they had
but
cut classes.
Then
Oh.
they basically left the school. They're not allowed to leave the school grounds during class
I
hours,
see.
but they did.
Right.
200. So that was evidence of a peaceable assembly to express an opinion
Things
as
are so
guaranteed
different now.
under the First Amendment.
Now,
Well, that's why I went back to that person talking about, having his iPad, or not iPad, whatever it is that he's talking to, and he's talking to his friend in Gaza who's being
Right,
bombed as
right,
he's walking down while he's walking down the street of Williamstown. It's unfiltered. The problem now is that, if you keep it that direct and that simple, it's effective. When John Kerry ran for president, Clear Channel owned all the AM talk
Mhm.
radio shows,
Mhm.
and so you got a whole certain take on John Kerry that was, it's hard to get the state focused and direct with what's relevant.
and one of the issues, even though all of the information is really out there,
Right.
and people have computers and so forth, if you don't know what you don't know, you don't know what
don't
to
know what you don't
Google
know.
for. I mean, really.
Well,
Well, that's
The
what,
unknown unknowns
Right.
that always get us.
right, but that's where the misdirection stuff has its way. I have no answer. I'm not saying we all need to be totally
Yeah.
sharp and focused all day
Yeah.
long and all
yeah,
that.
yeah, for sure,
You know.
for sure. There are 6 corporations that own practically every media outlet in this country.
Right, I mean, that's a whole different take. That's a whole, there's even been
And
media
they-
outlets that are created just for misinformation. There's not even sense.
Yeah.
There's
well,
no sense even
yeah,
talking, but
yeah.
that's what they're created for.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Even though they say it's equal news for everybody.
There's a great movie, I'm sure maybe somebody would have seen it, called Wag the Dog,
Oh,
with Pacino. Love the movie. Of course the actors, I mean.
shoes, right? Those are the shoes.
Yeah.
It's an
But-
old shoe.
Yeah, but think about the actual theme, subject, the topic of that movie, and this whole thing, everything was the whole fraud was perpetrated, the war, the hero coming home, was an actor.
Yep.
The war took place on a sound stage.
Yep.
And through the media, we're sitting in our living rooms and, we're receiving this thing. And we're automatically forming opinions
Right.
on it. And, like you said, 6 corporations own, whatever it is. The regular people of our world, the regular people of our society, of our community, and when I say regular, I mean people who aren't in power, the working stiff,
99%, isn't that the?
right, 99%, we sit and we want to believe that what we watch on TV or what we listen to on the radio, if anyone still listens to a radio,
But that's good. That they want
it's
to
true.
Right.
We want to
Yeah.
believe that. We want to believe
Yeah.
our government is telling us the truth.
I'm sorry, my grandparents came over from Lithuania, my mother was born here, so her cultural roots was cut off, and she wanted to believe. I'm not, you know, she believed in John Wayne and all that, and I have nothing against that. I mean, she was trying to develop a whole new identity. And that's,
Right.
my problem with that is people tap into that naivete, they tap into that
Mhm.
longing for
Mhm.
connecting.
Mhm.
Yeah. But then you get the person who questions that, and then they're labeled as a troublemaker or a,
Oh.
you know, and now, so again, you know, questioning,
right.
questioning
We
the
know all
powers that
about
be.
that.
You know, and I think that that's where we have a, you know, problem in society is that, you know, lower class system is not just a term, it's a place,
Yes.
you know, and when you say something, when a person says something from a certain class, lower class, I mean, you know, economically or whatever, you know, they are told, you know, that's no good, can't say that, you know, unless you're just so low on the totem pole that what you say doesn't really scare anyone.
Right, so you can say anything.
You know, so it doesn't matter what you say, you know, we're just
Well-
looking at the source, you know, and that again is even still not right. But, because I think everybody has something to say, everyone should have a voice, and everyone's voice should be heard. But that is such a generalization, and it never gets to a place where, change can actually happen. And so you have, you know, what do we do with that? What do we do? Can we use our First Amendment rights of free speech to actually affect change?
That's the
Well,
important part.
Yeah, I think the dark side of all that is yes, but more and more
Mhm.
because of this global war on terror, you can say whatever you want, you can say whatever you want to, but you have to know that whatever you do is going to be captured
Mhm.
by the National Security Agency, by the federal government. It's going to be captured, it's going to be stored, it's going to be connected with other people. It's a fundamental assault on the Constitution. Your First Amendment right of free speech, yeah, I can talk to whoever I want to. But I also have the right to be private in that conversation, I think. And although it's not part of our discussion today under the First Amendment right, one of the amendments, the Bill of Rights, is guarantee against unreasonable searches and
Yeah,
seizures.
fourth one, yeah.
But yes, speech is okay, but who knows what the government's, some later government perhaps is gonna do with all this information that they are capturing by private citizens who are speaking out.
And there have been preemptive arrests of people before they've done anything because of what they might do.
That's
Um,
right.
At the drone
Yeah.
base, just a
Right.
couple days ago, a 17-year-old out in the Midwest
Yep.
was arrested
Yep.
because of what they think he might do
He
in the
might do.
future.
I think one of our biggest problems now, based on this, is the purposeful use of misinformation. To me, that's one of the biggest crimes. that's
Well,
being
can we
perpetrated
agree
today.
from now on, we say Happy Native American Day?
Well, I think Seattle's banned Columbus Day altogether.
Well, yeah, someplace out there, they've now had Native American Day, and we
Well.
should also do that
Columbus Day.
out of
Yeah,
respect for
yeah.
the people who were here first.
Well, there's the famous cartoon of several.
We have to start wrapping up. I'm sorry.
See?
So does anybody have
Alright.
any final statements in terms of just, you know?
Well, I
know
wanna
you're sort of
thank
doing it.
Cat TV, because Cat TV is really the place
Yes,
in
indeed.
Bennington that supports the First
Here,
Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There you go.
So,
Yeah.
Cat TV,
yeah. My final word is defend the Constitution.
All right, I just want to say that I think that this is an example of the First Amendment right here, the fact that we can assemble and talk about this and have it broadcasted, you know, is something that actually speaks to the First Amendment. So,
Right.
you know, I'm grateful for this opportunity.
We're not exactly hiding. I don't know how many people are going to watch the show. But still, this is good.